So now I'm delighted to welcome and introduce today's distinguished speaker, Dr. Katie Strong. Katie Strong leads the Strong Story Lab in the Department of Communication Sciences and Disorders at Central Michigan University, where she explores how clinicians can support people with aphasia to rebuild their identity by co-constructing stories about who they were, are, and will be. She's deeply committed to the life participation approach to aphasia and sees a critical need for supporting mental health and well-being of people impacted by living with aphasia and cognitive communication disorders. Dr. Strong is a Tavistock Trust for Aphasia Scholar and a Fellow of the American Speech Language Hearing Association. She's trained teams in stakeholder engaged research as a PCORI-funded Project Bridge Midwest Regional Coordinator and is currently a member of the Friendship and Aphasia team, which has a research agenda to increase social connectedness in persons living with aphasia. She has over 30 years of experience as a certified speech-language pathologist providing clinical services to individuals with acquired neurogenic communication disorders. Dr. Strong's professional activities include President-elect Council of Academic Programs in Communication Sciences and Disorders, member of the Joint Committee on Interprofessional Relations between the American Psychological Association and the American Speech-Language Hearing Association, and Aphasia Access Conversations podcast host, where you may know her voice from. So I'll turn things over to you, Katie. Thanks for joining us today.
Sounds great. Thanks, John. Just give myself a minute to screen share here. Okay, so we'll go ahead and get started. I'm just honored to be here today and appreciate the invitation with John and the folks at Aphasia CRE. This is a really fabulous series, and I'm just really delighted to be here. So as we get started, John let you know that we're talking about co-constructing stories and supporting people with aphasia in meaning making and helping them move forward. I just wanted to state that I am an employee at Central Michigan University. I'm going to be talking about a little project that we had some grant funding for, and I am involved in the Strong Story Lab. I'll be talking a little bit about virtual connections for aphasia recovery connection, and as John said, the working group for podcast for aphasia access. So we've got about 45 minutes of content together today, and then 10 minutes, if we time it right, for discussion. So I just wanted to give you kind of an overview of where I'd like to take you today. We'll first talk about the relationship between narrative, identity, and the story continuum, and also the impact of aphasia on mental health, which I know this crowd is quite familiar with, but we'll set the stage for how stories relate to that. We'll also talk about the importance of therapeutic alliance and the relationship, and how that is essential in supporting stories. And then I'll share some work about evidence-based methods that you might be able to incorporate using story into your clinical practice. So, all right, so let's get started. I like this quote by Christina Baldwin. Words are how we think, stories are how we link. You know, stories are really an essential part of who we are as people and how we make sense out of the world around us. So it's an important aspect of being human. And it's also, I think, a really a natural way of integrating how to support people with aphasia and being able to communicate with people who are important to them. So there's three concepts that I'd like for us to be talking about today and thinking about how they build on the work that I've been doing. The first is identity. Then we'll talk about story, and then we'll talk about social co-construction. So let's dig into the concept of identity, which can get really deep. We're not necessarily talking in a deep philosophical way here today. So I just wanted to say, you know, how I think of identity is this idea from Taylor, thinking about who we are, where we're coming from, and where we're going. That it's really this idea of identity being an evolving aspect of who we are that changes throughout life. And stories are really the building blocks for how we convey who we believe ourselves to be to others. And we might have different types of identities depending on the roles and situations that we're in. So, my role as a presenter here today versus a partner when I get home versus a family member with my mom, all of those different things, as well as biographic particulars and where we are within culture. Another concept that I'd like to bring into this is the idea of story. And within that, I do want to say that I'll be using story and narrative interchangeably. I know that, again, those concepts can be part and parceled out or may have different meanings in different sorts of settings. For the work we're talking about today, story and identity could be used interchangeably. So major life changes like having a stroke and living with aphasia can disrupt our life story or lead to what we might call a biographic disruption. And the more that something seems to be central to life, the more it begins to control how a person views themselves. So in the case of story and identity relating to having a stroke and aphasia, if the stroke and aphasia is taking up a really big space in someone's life, they may see that aphasia as controlling who they are or how they view themselves or their identity. When a change occurs, such as having a stroke or living with aphasia, we begin to alter our stories to make sense out of what has happened to us and to create new meaning out of what's happened. And this happens regardless of whether we're talking about illness or aphasia. It happens in all of our lives. When something happens, we use story to process how we might make meaning out of that. But illness does create a demand for stories, and hence the idea of this platform of narrative medicine and illness narratives that we'll talk about here in a moment. Barbara, Shannon, and I have written some work together on this, and one of the things that we had posted in one of our publications was this idea of there are different shapes and sizes of story, and they range from, in Bamberg's idea of small stories to big stories. And on the side of the small stories, thinking about our work here in speech language pathology and aphasia is the beautiful work coming from Lucy Dipper and Maddie Cruz in the Luna Project. Things about like everyday stories. Let me tell you about this, or this is a favorite story that I like to share, or something that we might think about a smaller story. In the middle of that continuum for narrative are what we might term illness narratives. Arthur Frank is certainly a staple in illness narrative area, but also some work by Lucius Horn et al. Have a beautiful textbook out that I'll talk about here in a moment. But that there's taking up a little bit bigger space than just a let me tell you what happened to me story in an everyday narrative, but a larger space, but not necessarily the whole life. And so then on this right side of the continuum are bigger life story narratives, such as with Bamberg and McAdams, where you're really talking about who I was in my early years and how that informed who I am today and what I'm thinking about as I enter into my later years in life. So lots of story shapes and sizes, just a few examples for you to think about today. Dan McAdams, a psychologist in Northwestern University, has done quite a bit of story work. And he talks about two different types of story. There are a contaminative story and a redemptive story. So an example of a contaminative story would be something that happens that is good, that is viewed as a negative. So for example, well, here in Michigan, the lottery is getting really large. I bought a ticket, I won it. This is really exciting. But now everyone is asking me for a loan, or no, I never know if anyone really wants to be my friend or if they're asking me to engage with them because they're looking for a loan. So this good thing that happened to me can turn into a contaminative sort of idea. The flip side of that is a redemptive story, which is what Dan McAdams has kind of built his career on. A redemptive story is one of something negative happening and overcoming that and making it into a positive. So in our case that we're talking about here today, I had a stroke and aphasia. I'm not able to work. I have lost lots of things that are happening to me that gave me a full life before my stroke and aphasia. But now I recognize that I have more time for spending time with my family and grandchildren. I'm being able to pursue some art that I wasn't able to do before, or now I'm able to be an advocate for telling people what this thing called aphasia is. So the thing about redemptive stories is that they can lead to people who really tend to live a more meaningful life, and that they are more prone to growth, communion, and agency. So that's pretty powerful stuff, right? That how you think about something can influence how you may move forward and your growth. Social co-construction is the third concept that we're going to be exploring today. And, we know that stories just don't happen in a vacuum, and neither do identities. And so the environment that we're in, who I'm with, or where I'm sharing a story influences which stories I might choose to tell, how I might choose to frame that story. And if, a story is responded to in a certain way, I may choose to tell that story differently the next time I share it, depending on how the audience reacts, or I may choose not to share it ever again, depending on how a person reacts to me. So this idea of who we're with and what our identities are influence how the words we choose and the way that we decide to share stories. So bottom line for me on this slide is that audience matters. And oftentimes in the role of clinician, we are audience to our clients who are bearing witness to their story. So it's important for us to recognize that. One of the things to think about is that we can make our lives bigger or smaller, more expansive or more limited according to how we interpret life in our story. So even, little changes and small edits or big expansive changes can really influence who we are as a person, as a human, and how that story influences how we view ourselves. So thinking more particularly about story, they can be used to make sense out of things, which is one of the catchwords for our title today. So making meaning out of things that happen to us. But stories are also really relevant to us as humans as they cultivate relationship, right? We can't think of the last time we probably got together with a friend or a family member and there wasn't a story that was shared. So it's really how we connect with other people. And also stories that we share and tell ourselves can contribute to a healthier identity, which is pretty powerful. All of this is great, but story relies heavily on language. And the population we're talking about today, language is a significant tool for story that has been changed. It might have been broken. It might have been, really damaged, or it may just have a chip on it. But they're different, different sorts of things that people with aphasia are not able to really use that tool of language for story that they used to prior to whatever it is that caused their aphasia. And that really then can influence how they view themselves and also how they might be able to process what has happened to them or make meaning out of that. So, so aphasia can certainly disrupt our life story, and, people with aphasia are disadvantaged for perhaps using story to help themselves move forward. recently I was on, I think this is from Facebook or social media, I will just say, but Deborah Meyerson, a stroke survivor with aphasia advocate, and founder of Stroke Onward. I saw this recently and I just thought this would be a nice something for us to think about, this identity, the change in identity. She says, strokes just don't create physical or mental disabilities. They can also steal our identities. I've spent the past decade working to regain my sense of self, trying to answer the question, who am I now? So thinking about, the clients that we work with, the people that we work with are really on this quest to reestablish who they are post stroke or traumatic brain injury or whatever it might be that had caused their aphasia. And now they are living with a chronic communication disability. So I know you all are highly aware of the negative impact of aphasia, impacting quality of life and ability to engage in community events, or depression, sense of helplessness, poor or reduced participation in activities that were of interest, and certainly reduced and limited friendships. So this is, really a challenge for people living with aphasia to be able to feel whole and connected. The Living with Aphasia Framework Outcome Measurement, or the AFROM, is certainly something that we use quite a bit here in the US and I think internationally, but thinking about situating someone living with aphasia in the center of all of this, and thinking about who ICF categories and how language and related impairments are certainly an area of target for intervention, and story work can certainly support language and related impairments. Also, personal identity and feelings. We're talking about that today, and how story work may be able to support someone in being able to renegotiate who they believe themselves to be. Also, stories are not told in a in a vacuum or by themselves. So there's always a language and communication environment, a partner, an audience, whether that's an audience of one or an audience of many, or even in writing, you're writing to an audience when you're doing putting a story together. So certainly story work can target this, as well as just being able to participate in life, right? As I said earlier, I can't think of a time when we are with other people when there aren't stories that are being shared. So story is important in being able to target all sorts of different areas, but also story has been shown to be a possible intervention for supporting people who have depression in being able to feel a little bit better about themselves. So the idea of step psychological care, I know there's been a lot of work with Ian Kneebone and Caroline Baker and lots of others on some really important teams trying to get step psychological care across care to be able to provide support for individuals with aphasia. But this idea that stories aren't just fun to have, but they actually have a meaning in helping people make sense out of themselves, but also can potentially be used to address mental health issues such as depression. So that's, a big deal that we can work on language and other things at the same time, so that guided story work, being identified to address depression and as an intervention with individuals with aphasia. And, why is this? I think that oftentimes the people that we're working with in clinic, we don't always have opportunity for reflection with our clients, or our clients haven't had an opportunity to reflect on what's happened with them, what caused the stroke, why did it happen, what's happening now, what is my future looking like? And so thinking about how we might be able to support them in exploring that journey of reflection, meaning making, and potentially viewing experiences differently to help them move forward can be quite powerful. For those of you, I was asked to put a slide together at the end of the talk with a couple of resources, and this is one of the resources that I have identified that I think would be a really great resource if you're interested in story. But illness narratives in practice, potential challenges of using narrative in health-related contexts. And Sabine Corsten and her colleague have written a chapter in there. I know she's also done one of these talks for Aphasia CRE, but thinking about how life story can support quality of life in individuals with chronic language impairment. So all of this is great. But I think we're just starting to recognize as clinicians that story has this power of being able to reformulate who we are as people. And Jackie Hinckley, a number of years ago, but I think still probably relevant, challenged us as clinicians to think that maybe we don't really recognize always the power of narrative in how that can help someone move forward. So as speech language pathologists, we are quite familiar with story. We are very used to using story in our work, but usually more as product. So I've got this tried and true older tool kit here that, is how we think of story traditionally, right? That story has a beginning, a middle, and an end, or we may support someone in story grammar, or we may think about how stories are sequenced, but we don't always think about story as a process, right? That we've got this like open bowl that we're maybe highlighting or accentuating the cracks that have been caused by stroke or having aphasia or other loss in life. And that I think that this work that I'm talking with you about today is really important for us to be thinking about, that there is this product, which is important, but equally as important as the product is the process. And that's what you as the clinician will be helping your client explore through that journey. So Barbara Shadden's, one of her clients, gave this quote that I think is quite helpful. Before my stroke, I wasn't concerned with a personal narrative. Popeye said, "I am what I am." And Aphasia said, "Who are you?" I said, "I don't know. This should tell me that I need you, speech language pathologist, and this group, other people, shared experiences, to help me discover my narrative moving forward." So this idea that clinicians support the process, but that it's not necessarily our story, right? It's the client's story, but we're there to help them. So thinking about this next idea of what is it that are some of the essential ingredients in co-constructing stories with our clients, or how do we do this work, which has really been my interest area. Barbara Shadden and I have had just the pleasure of collaborating with her. She's a fabulous human, and we have a couple of publications that I just like to throw out there. These again are part of the end of the resource slide that you can take a look at here. But we put together 2 articles, a clinical focus article in the ASHA perspectives, as well as a chapter in a fairly recent book by Audrey Holland and Roberta Ellman that were intended to provide some ideas for clinicians to be able to think about how they might start doing this work. So this is where if you're interested in this work, this might be a good place to start. But within both of these publications is this PULSE acronym, or this PULSE idea of how we might be able to take the pulse of those living with aphasia. And we're really talking about taking the pulse for story work. And so I should say this, that story work, just like any type of clinical intervention, is not for every client, and it's not for every clinician. So we need to make sure that we're really, taking a pulse and making sure that it is a good fit for each individual. But thinking about partnerships, uniqueness, listening, supporting, and exploring. So I'm going to take us through each one of these just a little bit more in detail. Relationships are essential. They're the bedrock of our clinical work, and that certainly is important in story work. So it all starts with a partnership, and there's, you know, some important information that's been published lately. I was reading yesterday, I was looking at looking to see what else was new in a therapeutic alliance, and I saw this. I know we're talking about aphasia today, but I saw this really great review article on stuttering, and quotes some really great actually work from our aphasia colleagues here. But thinking about relationships, right? This work with story is all about relationship, and that, you know, Linda Worrell thinking about relationship-centered care as really the bedrock of how we do this work. So things to think about, you know, with all of you in Australia and New Zealand, the fabulous work that's come out of the factor that we as clinicians play in influencing our clients' outcomes. So I think that in this work particularly, how we think and how we feel, how we approach the work that we're doing really can influence whether or not someone is interested or wanting to participate in this type of work. So I think that you know, this is powerful to me, that my thinking and my actions influence how my clients' rehab outcomes play out, right? So that's powerful stuff. And I, you know, think there's really an important thing to be thinking about as we look into this for the future. So thinking about, like, you know, from 2012, but still, you know, really beautiful work, rethinking practitioner thoughts and ways of working to optimize rehabilitation outcomes. So thinking about, you know, what we do as clinicians and how that supports or thwarts our clients in being able to move forward. So Kays, Mudge, Bright, and McPherson did some beautiful work in 2012, thinking about how we might do practice differently and change practitioner behavior. And I know this is a small slide here, but I just wanted to put this in here because if I think about, like, I'm going to just read a few things here: prioritizing listening, allowing silence, listening for stories, listening for what's not said, asking questions, allowing time, seeing ourselves as facilitator, you know, changing the power distribution between the clinician and the client, helping them discover what's important, recording things. These are all really essential key factors in the development of relationship in this pulse factor. So Michelle Lawton and colleagues, you know, some beautiful work, but thinking about these 5 factors here. And I was looking at them again recently, and they just really line up with the story work, right? Acknowledge me, respect me, listen, challenge, understand, laugh with me, hear me, encourage me. The U of the pulse, recognizing that every person is unique and that we celebrate that uniqueness, and that we've supported one person in exploring their story who has aphasia, that's one experience, but we can't apply that to all people that we work with who have aphasia. So recognizing that everyone brings something unique, that's something to celebrate, and that the experience will be different. But listening really is at the heart of this story work, and that the really, it's, I think, not a coincidence that the pulse, the L is in the middle of the pulse, because listening really is central to everything that we're doing. So it's that essential ingredient that really allows us to create space and be present with individuals, and really thinking about how we can be with and not attempting to change, but really providing support for our clients during this work is important. I've been doing a little bit of reading. This is a great book. If you haven't read it, it's been around for a little bit, but it's called See Me as a Person, Creating Therapeutic Relationships with Patients and Families. It is a book from psychology, but I thought this image and quote was really an important kind of bring it home moment for the act of listening. So it says, a piece of art which included this Chinese character was given to Michael by one of his patients. Its literal translation is simply listen. As she presented it to him, she told him what it means to her is this: you see me, you listen to me, you give me your undivided attention. The S, thinking about supporting stories of self. I think this is really where we as clinicians who've been working with clients for a while excel. It's providing all of the support materials, the communication ramps, how do we support people in sharing their stories? So great resources for something like this. Aphasia Institute supported conversation, better conversation. Both have beautiful e-learning opportunities for us to become more familiar with how to better facilitate and facilitate a better conversation. Likewise, being able to make materials aphasia friendly or accessible is an important part of this work and our role as clinicians. And then finally, the E for exploring, developing a genuine interest, and really being open to going off road with someone. Story work can take you wherever that client is wanting to take you, and so being open to being curious and authentically engaged in learning what it is that the client is wanting to share with your story. So. Just wrapping up that idea of the uniqueness that the narrative tasks of the clinician are to pay attention and to witness the lived experience of our clients. And isn't that an honor? So some of the, how do we do this work? This is all great, Katie, but how do we do this work? There's been some great work that's been done on exploring using identity or exploring identity work through narrative. And we've got, guided self-determination with Bronken and Kirkevold and their colleagues, Sabine Korsten and her colleagues with biographic narrative intervention, also guided autobiography from the narrative gerontology world, some of that adapted for stroke and for aphasia, and then some of the work that I'm going to be talking about today that we'll get into here in just a moment. So how did I get interested in all of this? When I was working clinically, I was supervising a speech pathology department, and Nikki, who is in the middle, pictured in the middle here, came into our rehab clinic, and she had severe global aphasia. She was depressed. She was unable to communicate. She was very communicate with words. She was very tearful and sad and just had difficulty engaging. Chris, her speech language pathologist, had been exploring some painting on her own, and invited Nikki to do some painting with Chris to explore kind of, would this be an opportunity for Nikki to express herself? And that worked quite well, which is a beautiful story in and of itself. But what I saw is that, oh, let's talk about how that happened. And Nikki started doing some presentations about how her artwork was and how it shaped who she was. And each time I saw Nikki and Chris tell Nikki's story and support it, Nikki became a little brighter and a little taller, and she used different words each time she shared it. And I was just so curious about what this magic was that was happening in front of my eyes. They certainly had this beautiful reciprocal relationship where they were both learning from one another, and also that Nikki was really becoming a little bit brighter in each time that she shared her story. And so I went back to get my PhD in my mid-40s after working a number of years clinically, and my goal was to be able to see if we could create something that my colleagues who were working clinically could use to do the same kind of magic that Chris and Nikki were putting out together. So I set out to think about this, that, what kind of role do healthcare providers play in supporting narrative reconstruction for identity? And so if we believe that identity is developed through through language-based narratives that are socially co-constructed, and we agree that aphasia alters language and identity, that people with aphasia might require some support in reconstructing or renegotiating who they are, and that healthcare providers, such as speech language pathologists, may provide a role in supporting people through that process. And so from this, I created the My Story project, which was informed by guided self-determination, biographic narrative, some group intervention. That was a protocol that clinicians could use in a outpatient basis, is really what I was trying to envision, where they might be able to, over 6 sessions, explore with their client who the client was before their stroke and aphasia, what happened to them and their stroke and aphasia, who they are today, and their vision for the future. So essentially, the My Story project has a number of story co-construction experiences where the clinician and the client are working together to co-construct or create the story that they are telling or wanting to tell. So there is this interaction between the clinician and the client, but there's also an element of storytelling that happens within the sessions, but then also this story project actually has a celebration event where after the story, the process has been gone through, the story is actually shared with people who are important to that storyteller. So the element of storytelling, and then also, the identity work. So exploring like who we are, and what, where am I going? So I'd like to just share a couple of slides from a couple of storytellers that I thought might be of interest today. The first storyteller that I'd like to share with you, he was really a boat builder, and part of his pre-stroke and aphasia life was building boats for fun. And so what I'm showing you here are the actual slides. We use PowerPoint in this, and so I'm just showing you a couple of slides from his presentation. So he talked about the boats that he built and showed the boats that he built in the process. It was very important for him to be able to showcase this, and then his participation of enjoying the boats. He's got family in the boats. There are people, he's in the boat. There's a couple of other family members in the boat. And so this was part of his past, and part of his future then, as we fast forward in the story a little bit, he had plans to wanting to build another boat with his son helping him, and talking about when you build a boat out of wood, many things that are the instructions don't go in. For example, the instructions say how to put the seats here, but you don't know where to build the seats. And there's lots of artistic and ability in fashioning boat from wood. So just want to kind of, we'll bring this home in a minute, but just want to share with you that, just thinking about his former life and how he's connecting it to the future. I'd like to share another storyteller in that the daredevil, this individual talked about how he liked to take risks prior to his stroke. Well, actually, he just liked to take risks. I'm going to say that. So liked motorcycles. This is one of the slides from his area. He's likes to go on motorcycles fast, worked as a mechanic. Took a trip around Lake Michigan in his younger years, a 600-mile bike trip with a friend, camping, riding, going across. So they rode up this way around Lake Michigan, up this way around Lake Michigan, and then came back across this way on a ferry. And his future and goals were that he wanted to ride a motorcycle. He wanted a certain type of bike. This is a picture of the bike he wanted. He was thinking about it so much that he wanted to take some money out of his retirement to buy this bike. He probably needed a new shed for the bike, and he really his goal in future was thinking about really wanting that right hand working a little bit better. So a couple of things to think about with this process. I talked to the storytellers about what it was like. They thought it was fun, very relationship based, providing perspective and reflection, and this idea of the value of the co-construction, that this partnership where the storyteller brings their expertise of their life and the clinician brings their expertise of negotiating identity, facilitating communication, and providing organization to helping the person put the story in order. So some things to think about of what went well in the story process. I love this quote, right? Your input was very small. He's telling me this is what my input was very small, meaning that he had ownership over the story. And he went on to say, you're not overdoing it or underdoing it. It's really working. So one way that we kind of took a pulse on whether or not the storyteller felt like the stories were their own after each session is we would have them rate, where do you fall on this scale, and how do you feel about that rating? So 100 could be great, or 50 could be great if they felt like, that, or 50 isn't great because they're feeling like, yeah, you came in pretty strong today, Katie, you need to rail it or dial it back a little bit. But so giving some checks and balances for power, I think, was important. We published the results of the My Story project a number of years ago, thinking about how powerful it was. More than a story, my life came back to life. But I'd like for you to share or to hear it directly from one of the clients themselves. So I've got a video here with a transcript that hopefully you'll be able to hear. Oops, you'll be able to hear. So
I was stoked to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I didn't know chose my words here.
Mm-hmm.
We did. Can't wait was great.
Yeah.
I love the whole thing. Just blows my mind. It's an amazing story. No, not the story, just the whole. Not the story. My story is just a story, my life. But the whole thing we did here, it changed my life. I really did. It was amazing.
So he's really getting this idea, right? That it's my story, it's just a story, right? The product of his story, but the process was really powerful for him, and it provided him some opportunity to make some new connections and some ideas. So I wanted to share a little bit with you about some one-year follow-ups. I've not published this data yet, but just wanted to give you some ancillary updates. So on the boat project, during interview, person had decided to build a boat again. He picked out the dory and had a plan. He wasn't yet working with his son, but he was excited about maybe thinking about being able to build a boat again. So again, the idea of maybe thinking about connecting who I was with who I am, talking about it and making things happen. Also back to our daredevil here. My future and my goals. I want to ride a motorcycle. I went to the Terra Trike factory and bought a trike, and you can see him here in the bike, and that he got the shed. He's still working on that right hand. So I just wanted to show a short video of, if this isn't participation-based intervention, I'm not sure what is, but beautiful out there on the bike. So, and also thinking about, if this isn't identity, then wow, big stuff. So okay, so a couple of other things. I know we're doing pretty good on time. So one wintry day in Michigan a number of years ago, Google Scholar told me I should read something, and I saw this publication that had from music therapy about how you could write songs about who you were, who you are, and who you will be. And I thought, this sounds like the My Story project. And so I got a little bit deeper into Tamplin and colleagues have this beautiful protocol about, it's a 12-session intervention where you spend 4 sessions writing and recording a song, and then about who you were. Then you have 4 more sessions about writing and recording a song about what the present, and then another for the future. As reading the article, and it's designed to support self-concept and identity, but it did say a little disclaimer that they felt like it was not appropriate for people with aphasia. And so I felt like maybe I didn't know if I agreed with that. And so I decided to take it for a test drive with 3 songwriters with people with aphasia. And we created an adapted Tamplin's protocol for people with aphasia. We had an interdisciplinary team with a songwriter, a student clinician, and myself, and a music therapist, where we met and created 3 songs about their life. So we had 3 participants in this project, and we also, of course, then you've got a story, you need to put a celebration together. So we had a release party to share the songs. So the songs that were created were this idea of who I was, who I am, and who I will be. Just wanted to show you a little bit of map of some of the first sessions that happened from these songs. I know this might be hard to read, so I'm just going to recap it for you. It says before. This is a spouse who had written this out for the songwriter. High achiever, energetic, more positive, enjoy life, love to drive, travel, work, love being social. After, changed my life completely, taking medication daily, not independent, frustrated, social life is different. People treat me differently, rob me of my life. Future, walk, talk, be more independent, and my favorite, win the lotto. Tom Sather and I recently published some results of this study, and wanted to just share with you we thought the active ingredients, this overarching theme of this process was a catalyst for highlighting relationship-centered experience and meaningful engagement and identity exploration. As Tom and I were working through the results and the paper, this idea of how much this encompasses PERMA from positive psychology, this positive emotion, engagement, positive relationships, meaning, and accomplishments. And so we hope that you'll maybe take a little more look at that paper if you're interested in that. Big shout out to the people who helped us with the songwriting project. But I have a couple more projects I'd just like to run through with you. Pandemic happened. One of my silver linings of pandemic was that we moved the My Story project to a virtual environment, virtual connections for aphasia, which is a collaborative effort between Aphasia Recovery Connection and Lingraphica. We've actually started training students as story coaches using the Pulse model and supported communication, and some of our storytellers use high-tech AAC devices. So what we did was take a couple of 4 to 6 students and 4 to 6 storytellers with aphasia and pair them together for 10 to 12 weeks, meeting virtually and sharing in a small group format, as well as when the story is ready, celebrating as a member spotlight back in the aphasia virtual connections community. And that work will be, we've done some analysis, and look forward to sharing that with you in a little bit. Hopefully in the next little bit, we'll have some papers out. So, but just, thinking about how we address identity and work on identity, that, are thinking about how we might be able to continue work with ongoing co-construction methods. How would we train practitioners and students to use this sort of work, and being able to tie power to the power of story to mental health outcomes. I know IARC is happening this summer in Australia. I won't be joining you, but I'll be living vicariously. But the last time we had an IARC, it was in Philadelphia, and this crew on the slide here met in a parking lot outside of the hotel, and we had not really met one another together. Barbara and I had met, and I think Sabine and Bianca had been colleagues, but all of us had some shared interest in identity and story. And so we've actually been meeting for the past 2 years talking about how we might be able to move some story work forward in training students and clinicians in doing some of this work. So we've got some collaborative things that are in the works, and we look forward to sharing that with you in the future. So just a couple of sneak peeks of what maybe is in the works. Erin O'Brien and I recently had a paper that's a tutorial or a clinical focus paper talking about how clinicians can use story in billable sessions, and so that should be coming out within the month, I think. And then our story, our identity group work, maybe thinking about how we can have some literature in what it's like for storytellers to be in virtual story experiences, training students as story coaches, what are some differences in international training, and how to maybe integrate virtual story into an ICAP. So bottom line is that story is transformational, and that, stories are an important part of being human and making sense out of what's happening to our lives. And that, stories are more than products, and the process is an important aspect of that transformative work. And clinicians are a valuable part of that transformative process. So the thing about story work is that it's not just the storyteller that can be transformed, it's also the clinician. So, be ready for receiving some things and changing how you may view things as well. We hope that maybe the Pulse framework might be a first step for clinicians who are interested in this work, and but certainly more training and tools are necessary. So I've got just a couple of ideas for you to think about, different ways to engage in story work, but we'll maybe make this available afterwards. And just a couple of thank yous to all the Strong Story Lab member alumni, all the people who have participated in virtual connections for Aphasia, and the story coaches. With that, I'll stop and see if we can have a couple of time for questions.
Thanks, Katie, for taking us through that work.
Yeah.
I love that it started so organically. You saw this made a difference in someone's life, and that led to a PhD and all of the work you've been doing. Particularly like that someone made the assumption that songwriting might not be suitable for aphasia, and you said, well, we'll see about that, and let's give it a go. And I just thought the comment from your participant that it's just a story, and yet it's not just a story, like it's been really powerful for him. So it's a almost surprisingly potent kind of approach. We'll jump to some questions in a moment if people would like to add a few more, but I thought I'd start with a few of my own. I don't know if you've come across many cases where the spouse or family perspective on a story differs quite a lot from the person themselves, and how do you deal with that? Of course, it's the person with aphasia's story, but the family is kind of part of the scene as well. How do you approach that?
Yeah, it's such a great question. Well, I think maybe there's a couple of ways to think about that. One is that something we haven't developed yet, but that I know some of our family members have asked is, what about my story too? So there is this story that is a partner or family member's story as well, that I think is potentially ripe for exploring and how that might be supported. But how we've kind of done the integrating family into story is that it's really part of the storytellers. It's if they would like their family to be involved in the story process, then that's what we will do. For my dissertation, we actually asked them to not be a part of the sessions, just to see if like, oh, we don't want the family's influence to this is their story. But during the songwriting, we had people in there because they wanted them in there, and actually it worked really great. So I think it's just a matter of like, oftentimes the storyteller or person with aphasia isn't able to remember some of the details that they want to remember. And so it actually creates some really beautiful natural opportunities for conversation and engagement. And then maybe, ultimately, we haven't had any like major I don't agree with that.
Hmm.
I think I guess if that happened, we would just address it as in any sort of environment. But I do think, um, it's as with any story, there's always like, I don't quite remember it that way, or I do. And so I think it just maybe adds for more opportunity for conversation. How about that?
Yeah.
Mhm.
I suppose that the systems we're in don't let us fully focus on the impact of a stroke or other illness on family. And yet, of
Mhm.
course, they do have their own story and their own take. So that, yeah,
Yeah.
love to see
I've
where that leads.
I've thought that maybe like a guided autobiography group because guided autobiography is group based and writing outside of the sessions and then coming and sharing the stories might be a
Mm,
really powerful avenue for family members. So, but
yeah.
there's lots of ways. So.
There's a question from Todd Barrett, who says, "Can you tell us about your work and research with Picture Voice Project?"
Yeah. So hi, Todd. We did some photo voice work. Jackie Hinckley and Aaron Bush and I did some photo voice work where we adapted photo voice technique to people with aphasia and people with brain injury. We had two different groups and asked them to take pictures of what represented their quality of life. And then put together a public display of that work. That did happen during COVID. So the display is, it's a YouTube video. It's actually available. You can link to it from my website, and I think it's in some other spaces too. We are in the process of putting that paper. It's under review right now, so we're hoping that maybe it'll be out to be shared. But I think stories and photographs are a powerful way to be able to tell stories, and that collective group of photo voice and being able to get input from others who are living similarly with similar challenges, I think is really powerful.
Thank you. And a question from Robin O'Halloran. Thank you, Katie. Really wonderful presentation. What do you think the barriers are for clinicians to do story work? Well, perhaps the perceived barriers as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, and some of this might be, Aaron O'Brien and I've been thinking a lot about this in this paper that we're hoping will be out in the very near future. But I think time and reimbursement are the things. And so we tried to think about like, actually this work doesn't take more time because you're not really they're bringing and you're reacting. So you're preparing to listen and to support, but figuring out then how are you framing all of the things, whether you're targeting language or you're targeting self-report of confidence or identity or, those sorts of quality of life, those sorts of things. I think it's a shift in getting clinicians to shift in how they might think about using the time that they have in the clinic sessions with their clients.
Yep. And do you see this approach as primarily the speech pathologist's role, or would you like to see psychologists and other professions?
Yeah, I think when I designed the original My Story project, I really didn't intend it to be only for speech language pathologists. I think if someone who is interested in supporting someone's story and they have the skills to be able to support a communicator who has aphasia, I think that, the sky's the limit there.
Well, thanks again, Katie. I'm going to briefly talk about our next month's seminar.
Sounds great.
If I can get Zoom to do what I want it to do. There we go. So if you would like to re-listen to today's seminar or share it with someone else, you will find the recording on the YouTube channel, along with the majority of our previous seminars. To keep up to date with the CRE, you can look at our blog, Facebook, Twitter, and now you can also find us on LinkedIn as well. And you'll see our announcement for the next seminar, which will be Alexandra Salem from Oregon Health and Science University. And she'll be delivering a presentation on the use of artificial intelligence in assessing the speech of people with aphasia. And this will be the 24th of April, or actually the 23rd in the US, I believe, that should say. And we'll see you all then. Thanks again, Katie.
Thanks. Bye-bye.